Hi, Dr. Leung.
Thanks for having me
joining
back.
us. So again, welcome to Scrubbed Out Orthopedic Grand Round. So my name is Dr. Adrian Huang. Below me, or above me, however you're looking at it, you see Dr. Fay Leung. She is the program director of the Orthopedic Surgery Residency Program at the University of British Columbia here in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia, where we are sitting right now at Vancouver General Hospital in the Diamond Center. Dr. Leung, in addition to being our program director, she is an incredible upper limb surgeon. So if you missed it last week, we had an amazing discussion about what program directors look for. Make sure you either check out my reels and then and we'll post it on my YouTube as well, the Reels Scrubbed Out, so make sure you subscribe there. But today, one of the most common topics we get asked for is, can you talk about how to get those ultimately important reference letters? And this is such an incredibly important topic because I have personally seen reference letter sink amazing applicants, and Dr. Leung is nodding her head. So, let's dive right into it, right? So, Dr. Leung, how important are reference letters?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, in particular, I think reference letters are really important. Now, back even a couple of years ago before the pandemic, it was really de rigueur that we would have a lot of elective students coming through. And then, of course, with the COVID pandemic, people couldn't travel as much. And there were a couple of years where we couldn't have elective students at all. So the only people that we really saw were our own students, which were great. But if you were from Montreal or from Ottawa and you wanted to come here and check out your program, it was really difficult to do that for you to get to know us, and it was also really difficult to know you. So in that regard, these referees is kind of a surrogate way of us to get to know you from a different angle. You know, we get your letters that you write to us, we see your CV, but it's nice to see you from a different lens, and that's really where the referees are really important. So yes, they're very important. We read all of them.
If they're so important, who are the best people to write you reference letters? Because I have that question all the time.
You bet. So I think even when you ask me who should be writing your reference letters, there are two things that you're asking me. Really who that person is, and the second question is who that person is to you. Right. So let's go through those systematically. So who should that person be? Honestly, it's someone who can speak honestly with respect to your skills, your knowledge, and your character. And by character, I mean things like how good you are at working with teams, how personable you are, how hardworking you are, what your integrity is like with patients, and that kind of thing. So you want someone who can speak to all of those three. Usually it's going to be an orthopedic surgeon that you're asking if you're specifically applying to orthopedics. Now, the orthopedic world within Canada is fairly small, so we generally know of most people. I would say certainly if you're able to find someone at that site, write a letter for you that you're applying to, that's even better. But sometimes that's not always possible, and that's fine. There's some people who write a lot of reference letters, and that's really great too. In fact, I don't mind that. I think it's great when someone writes a lot of reference letters because for me, that they're able to give me an idea of where the candidate is compared to the rest. So, like I said, I think an orthopedic surgeon, if you're able to at that site, is really important. But if not, that's okay, as long as you're able to speak to those three things. Now, what if you're at a site and you're only there for an elective for 2 weeks and you really had a very passing relationship with the staff and you really want to apply to that program? Well, actually, on the CARMS website, they actually describe who a referee can be. It can be a professor, it can be someone who's clinical, but it can also be someone who's non-clinical, and it can be a resident. And I would actually stress that point, that it can be a resident, because the resident is probably someone that you're going to be spending quite a lot of time with in really hard hours. You're working hard in the middle of the night, and they probably have a very good perspective on how hard you work, how well you work as a team, and all that kind of thing. And honestly, if a resident in my program wrote to me in a reference letter and say, hey, this is what I thought of this candidate, I would actually take that very seriously, and sometimes even might be more important than the very passing relationship that you have with a staff member.
So it's interesting you said that because people always think of someone who's going to be your reference as, like you said, a professor or your program director. What are your thoughts? Is it better to have someone like a resident write you one, or is it better, we have more weight on a program director writing you one? And the second part of that question is because there's two kinds of references, right? There's people who write you one on paper, right? And there's your advocates who are the ones who are making phone calls afterwards. So is it kind of one of the things we're going to talk about later is what is a smart way about getting a reference letter? So is it actually better to have a program director write you the letter and then have the resident, like, make the phone call to your program director, aka one of our residents, call you and say, actually, this person was really awesome?
All of those things work, honestly. All of those things work. On paper, we really want to limit the amount of what's it called again? The backdoor kind of things, right? Like our process should be very transparent. We don't do handshake deals, and it's called scuttlebutt, right? We really want to minimize the scuttlebutt.
What's it called?
Scuttlebutt. Scuttlebutt is because if you give me 3 references,
you use that word more.
Yeah, if you give me 3 references, typically those are the only references I'd be able to contact. So that backdoor channel, it really is. We really want to kind of minimize the impact of that. That being said, we do have residents on the committee, right, on the comms committee, and so that word of mouth, it does transpire to a certain extent. If I were to get a perfect package for here, I mean, honestly, someone probably whose opinion I respect, so one of my colleagues, maybe one of the residents that you've worked with intimately, and maybe someone else that you've done an incredible project with, you've had even, your piano teacher who you've worked with for 30 years. I mean, those are all interesting stories to help formulate a picture of you. In terms of choosing, I mean, again, this is going to be limited to the experiences that you have, but really someone who you've had that experience of having a connection with, or having something that you've done something with, is important. And this is a part of who that person is in station, and that who that person is to you. And that second part is particularly important. I would think about, when you're assessing who to ask on a given rotation, who you've had a particular interaction with, right? You've had a good interaction with, right? Or you've had a good experience with. And you really want to retrospect, or be reflective on what good means and what was good about it, right? So for example, if you and I had a nice chit chat and we got along, we had a couple of laughs, to think about, hey, you know what? I really like talking to Adrian because he's a really affable guy. He's really amiable. Or maybe you let me do something. You let me close a case. Or maybe we had a really great discussion that challenged me, challenged my knowledge. And you and I had a very intellectual discussion about that. That's what I liked about it. Identify what it is that you liked about it. Now, once you've identified that, what would be great is if you come to me and you say, hey, can you write me a reference letter? I'm going to write you an email. And that email, it says, thank you for offering to write me a reference letter. I really enjoyed blah, 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 blah. And I, on the basis of the experience that we had because of this, I would like to write you a reference letter, and here's my CV, right? And the reason that I think that's so important is, one, it shows reflection on your part as to what made a good rotation, what made a good experience. And it helps me as a referee remember you. I might just remember, hey, you know what, Adriana, you and I we had a really good time. And we had a couple laughs, but I don't really remember too much more about that, especially a couple of weeks after the fact. But if you are able to articulate that, I'm like, oh yeah, we did have that great talk. And that will show up in the reference letter, right? Yeah. As well as parts of the CV. I actually want to back up and talk a little bit about, if it's okay with you, what makes a good reference letter.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
That's helpful, right? So
Totally.
When I'm looking at a reference letter, I'm actually looking for 3 things, right? Or you want me to be looking for it to be, firstly, complimentary, right? I mean, obviously you want a letter that sounds good, that looks good. And sometimes that's a little bit hard to control, but if you've had a good experience with someone, chances are they probably reciprocated and had a good experience with you. So we want that to be complimentary. The second thing that's important to me, maybe not so much to you, is that the report has to be discerning, right? Unfortunately, there are some people that write glowing reference letters and say that, hey, Adrian is of the top 1% of candidates that I've worked with in the last 20 years. And then I get another reference letter from the same person that says, Justin is one of the top number 1% of candidates that I've worked in the last 20 years. I mean, you get my point.
100%. Well, you can't take those seriously, right? Because who do you trust?
That's exactly right. So, and that's something that you can't worry about, but that's something for me to worry about. And this is where the concept of getting someone who actually sees people fairly regularly is particularly helpful. So what we have now is the AOS ranking system, where it's basically a Likert scale. And it's just a form. And the referees will check off where you are in terms of skills, knowledge, basic competency. And those are helpful. But again, without any narrative, it's hard to contextualize, which gets me to the third important part, which is the personal part. You'd like for that letter to be personal, so that I know when I get this letter that the person's actually given some thought about you, right? And that the report that they're giving is actually reflective of the experience that you have, and they have some stories to back that up. So if you're the top 1% candidate, they're also going to tell me why they think you're the top 1% candidate. It's like, you know what, I've never seen a resident or a medical student do this before. The way that he handled that situation, the way that he handled the family and the patients in this difficult time, his documentation, his understanding, these were really top notch to have those things. And so if that's the perfect letter that I want to see, what are the steps that you can do to foster that, to basically lay it out for your referee, so that we can see those in the committee?
So it's a really good point. So, and I know we have a lot of people from kind of all over the world, like kind of tuning in and asking for this talk, but maybe Justin, so shout out to Justin, he's our medical student, he's our pre-med student who's helping us out. He's doing the kind of helping us with the text, so he's on here, so thank you very much. But Justin, can you go on the CARMS website, carms.ca, which is our national ranking system, and there's actually just, if you look up reference letter guide, they actually have a really good guide, exactly like Dr. Leung said. So if you pop that in the comments, that would be super helpful. And so if anyone needs to, that is a guide that basically has everything that Dr. Leung has said. And it's really interesting because what you said about how do you prime somebody for that, I've now had a lot of students, even the past several years, essentially, ask me to be a referee, and I say yes, and they just email me the guide and email me like bullet points of what they thought were, good interactions, and like you said, jogging my memory under each one of those things. And I thought that was a really good way of doing it, because ultimately, if you can lay it out for me and I agree with everything you're saying, I mean, like you said, it does jog my memory to kind of all the good times that we had and all the your strong suits, if that makes sense. So in terms of priming, you said it has to be a complimentary letter. That was like number one, I think, in terms of what you said. And a lot of people may think that is a foregone conclusion, but in fact it's not. So one of the things that I always recommend is asking, but asking in a very specific way. Dr. So-and-so, would you be willing to support my application and write me a complimentary or supportive reference letter, right? And then if they say yes and they still write something bad, well, that's not on you. That's just on them being, a mean person. But, if you just say, hey, can you write me a reference letter? I mean, you're not specifying whether it's good or bad. I mean, yeah, I'll write you a reference letter, but you have no idea what's going in it, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely right. I mean, when someone asks me that very specifically, and I don't think that, I don't think that I can do that, I would honestly feel it on my conscience to say, hey, you know what, perhaps I can redirect you.
Exactly. It gives you an out, which is the most important thing. When you go to an elective, for example, what is the best way to set yourself up for a successful reference letter?
I think that, if I were to rank the things that you would like to have, of course, you get to choose someone who's high ranking in the selection committee, and someone who's you're going to like, and someone who you're going to spend a lot of time with, and someone who you're going to have a lot of positive interactions with. But that may not always be realistic. And I think that that's important to recognize, is that you're not always going to be paired with that person or have those opportunities. That's okay. It is not foregone. In fact, you may do yourself a disservice in refusing to work with other people because you've got your sights targeted
Fair
on
enough.
this, right?
Good point. Yeah, good point. Great
So
point.
don't do that. I mean, honestly, there's we have so many people in our program, for example, who are very, very used to working with applicants and with candidates, and they're excellent referees. So don't discount someone who's not even on the selection committee.
Yep, absolutely.
I really think that if you're having a good time with someone and you're learning and they're teaching you and you feel like you're progressing and you're getting a good feel of how the program looks like, take that and run with it. In fact, I'd way rather have someone who, only writes a couple of reference letter every year give me a really honest opinion, a really detailed account of how you performed, rather than someone who saw you for 3 seconds and said, hey, you know what, I saw Adrian, said hi to him, seems like a pretty good guy, he washed his hand, came to my OR, and then walked out, and that was it. I mean, really, that to that point of it being discerning and personable, like really, I think those factors weigh highly over and above just, you know, who that person is.
Yep. No, wonderful. There's a question from Annie Sanders here. What do you do if you have an older letter? So they're an IMG, and they end up doing a PhD and applying for residency, but the clinical letters are now 2 to 3 years old. Can you use them, or what do you do?
Yeah. So there's a couple of things about that. I mean, firstly, you really want to make sure that you're first of all, there are some criteria as to how long you can be out of clinical practice before when you apply to residency. So I would really be cognizant of that. And I think, you know, once you get past a couple of years, there is something that you need to look at and think about for that. But, you know, again, you're allowed 3 reference letters, or most programs take 3 reference letters. So finding yourself a mix is important. If all of your reference letters are from 3 years ago and you have nothing to show since then, well, you know, maybe that's not the perfect mix. But if you have one reference letter that's from clinical and then one that speaks to what you've been doing over the course of the last couple of years at the very minimum, you know, I think that's a good mix.
This question also goes back to what we talked about last time, which is essentially, you know, you have to build your narrative, right? So even if you've been out, but you've been doing a PhD, your narrative net isn't maybe, you know, that you're going to be all talking and glowing about your clinical work for the past couple of years. It might be what you've been doing during your PhD and what you learned. And as Dr. Leung said, you can then get a character reference and even like a research reference. I mean, these people do hold weight. Like, you know, your PhD supervisor, you know, your professors there, they all hold weight. And they have seen you work for the past, you know, 2 or 3 years. I think it's really, really important. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely agree. Really, all of these pieces are to put together the whole, right? And you know that you're more than the sum of one reference letter plus another reference letter plus even, you know, your grades. And so all the bits and pieces that you can put together for us and show us who you are as a person, show us how you work in different circumstances, how you respond in different ways. That all of those things are important. So yeah, I completely agree. If you've been doing your PhD for the last couple of years, certainly send us a reference letter in that regard, and then that's also going to be something that you write about in your personal letter, like we talked about before, that narrative, right?
The other thing that I personally had a lot of problems with when I remember asking for letters is following up and making sure that they were done in time, you know, and that's very stressful because, and I'm guilty of it myself sometimes, leaving the letter, you know, the attending leaving the letters to the last minute. You know, it's very stressful. So what is like the appropriate way to remind your referee of the impending deadlines that are coming?
That's a great question. I mean, you've been a kid, you're a parent, but you're also a kid, and you know, when reflecting on, you know, how to best have someone motivate you, how did your parent best motivate you to get something done, right? And certainly if someone's going to be nagging at you, that's probably not the best approach to do it. It's also you know, very anxiety provoking just to completely leave it alone. So it's really got to be with a thoughtful and light touch. Right, that artful bit of pressure, but not too much to really force somebody over the edge.
I'm laughing because I remember specifically that I did the opposite when I was a medical student, and I emailed the MOA and the surgeon so many times.
Yeah.
So the last email was, Adrian, we've done this before. We'll get it in. So maybe don't go that in depth into it. Lighter touch is better.
Don't have anyone ever accuse you of harassing them, I think would be the line that you probably should cross.
I was so anxious.
Yeah. So, you know, one of the interesting things so firstly, I think you really want to know that everyone knows when it comes to writing your reference letter for CARMS that this is a very serious thing. Like, this is something that people depend on, and this is potentially career changing. So we know that. People know that, and they take that and they take it seriously. Okay? So most of these people will respect that. So you you send them the email, again, with your CV, highlighting the things that you found were great about working with them, right? Prime them to write this reference letter. And you say, thank you so much for writing this reference letter. And then you say, should I contact your MOA later at a certain time to ensure that it's been done for my own peace of mind? And then they may respond, right? And if you don't hear anything back from them when it comes close to the deadline, then send them a gentle reminder and say, I want to thank you again for offering to write my reference letter. As you recall, the deadline is November, blah, blah, blah. Just want to make sure that we're all good. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to help you, or if you're no longer in a position to write the letter. And that is it. This is now out of your hands.
That's a wonderful, wonderful way of asking again, actually. So, and I will also add, as a referee for people over the past years, the best way is one of the things we talked about before. If you have that template ready and you've emailed us with bullet points, and all it is us reading it and agreeing and then typing those into our own kind of words, it just makes it so much easier. It's much less daunting, and then we're much more apt to get it back to you, earlier on, because all we are doing is just basically hashing it out. So all these things are so important, because then if you're doing the one thing correctly, it leads to the other thing being a little bit easier, I think.
Honestly, I think the most important thing that we've talked about is that priming piece.
Yeah.
People will not remember the details of what happened in your rotation 2 weeks down the road, never mind a month, etc. So you making that really apparent for them is really important. A note about the MOAs too. So I don't know about your relationship with my MOA. My MOA, honestly, I cannot speak enough about her, and I don't even want to say her name out loud because I'm scared someone's going to poach her. I give her free rein to harass me, right? I give her free rein to harass me.
Yeah.
And so if someone's left something for her to get me to do, she will dog me, and
Yes.
we will get it done.
I'm the same. Yeah.
She will also, however, tell me if someone's been harassing her. So
That's
much
absolutely.
as she's
That's
protected.
exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
So, having that relationship and say, do you want me to be in contact with your MOA? You say yes, okay, that's fine. But you also want to be respectful of that communication.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That's a really good point. And so then another question that I really get oftentimes is, should you get reference letters kind of as you go along, or should you all wait until the end? Because then, the pro and con there is, if you ask them as you go along, you have many letters, but then the con is that you have many letters and you have to choose which one to submit. My suggestion has always been, get them as you go along, because again, that referee is primed, and then it's a good problem to have to decide which letter to submit afterwards. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree with you. So one of the things that we talked about earlier is what my perfect package looks like to me, right?
Yes.
And so my perfect package looks like this: 3 reference letters. At least one of them is from my program, right? If you can, and or maybe even 2. If you've had one from a resident and one from one of our faculty here, that's fantastic. And you have one from a different province, or someone you did research with from someone else, or someone else who had a really good rotation with you. So 3 reference letters, at least 1, if not 2, that are from this facility. And again, one is just fine. One is just fine. But that would be what my best package would look like for me.
I think also, if you are in the fortunate position to have multiple reference letters, you can be a little bit strategic as well, because, for example, like if Dr. Leung and I are good friends, right? So if you happen to get a reference letter from me, even though I'm not a program director, that might be a good thing to submit to Dr. Leung. If I'm telling my friend Dr. Leung that, hey, you're a good person, and she trusts my opinion, right? So these are the little things that you can be strategic about. Do you have any other tips like that?
That's absolutely, and so that was what I was starting to get to, and then kind of got sidetracked in it. But so if that's my best 3, that's also Saskatchewan's best 3. That's also McGill's best 3. So if you've done rotations for all of those things, and you have the option of really collating and picking and choosing which reference letters are going where, then that's fantastic. Or you have the option of saying, hey, you know what, my first rotations actually kind of suck because I had no idea what was doing, and I did, that's okay, because you got better towards the end. And towards the end, man, like I feel like I was really hitting it, and my the way that I was able to function on the ward, the way I was able to talk to patients, my skills, all those things were so good that I would rather have this group of people referee for me, and I think these are much more positive than my first experiences. So then use those. But definitely, I think it's a rare time that less options is better than more options.
Totally agreed. Yeah, and it kind of is a reminder for you now, also, like all the people on here. Don't wait until the last second to get your reference letters. Get them in early, because remember, you're not the only person asking that person to be a reference. So, if you ask them early and ask them, be the first to ask them, they're probably more likely to say yes, because by the end, they're drowning in reference letters they can't do anymore, right?
Absolutely. And honestly, I mean, you may be an amazing person and just an absolute shining star. But like Adrian and I were talking about, a couple months pass, and you kind of, the more distance that you're away from the shining star, the more you forget the warm, fuzzy glow. So
totally.
get it while it's hot.
Yeah, get it while it's hot, exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. If you don't feel as though you have somebody who has seen you perform strongly, or if there's people who have kind of declined to give you a letter, what do you do in those situations, kind of overcoming these challenges?
Yeah. Yeah, that's tough. I mean, firstly, I would really ask if you if you genuinely have failed to connect with anybody in any of the programs or in this field, I think maybe a little bit of introspection to think about what is compelling about this field. Not to say that you don't belong there, not to say that at all, but really have a good think about what are the factors that have brought you to this particular point. And once you have that figured out, that's where you go searching for your reference letters, right? Like if you say, hey, you know what, the real reason that I went into orthopedics or I want to go into orthopedics is because I'm just making things up here, but the biomechanics of it are so interesting to me. I did a biomedical engineering degree, and the research that I did or the project that I did really are so connected to orthopedics, then that's your reference. It's the person that you did the biomechanical engineering project with, right? But really kind of getting to the root of why you want to do this, what you find so compelling, and there probably is someone in there that can speak to that for you.
That's a great suggestion, and that goes back to the question about the PhD, right? Why did you do the PhD? And there must be something great about that PhD or something positive from there, because not everyone has that degree. That's a very advanced degree. So you can definitely leverage that. And that also goes back to, again, what we talked about last week, building your narrative. Why are you here? Developing your personal touch, that personal story that's going to, put you a little bit above or at least different than everyone else's story. Give you a little uniqueness.
Now, another concept that we talked about last week, and that I want to expand upon a little bit, is that concept of ideal. Right. So here we are we talked about this a little bit last week about the ideal this, the ideal that, the ideal CV that you write, the ideal letter that you write, your perfect CV, all those things. Those are ideals that most people will not meet, and that's okay. It's how you frame that, how you narrate that is really important. And we had a discussion about the distance traveled concept, and that's actually really important. So say your grades were terrible, but you did something else, or say you don't have any reference letters in orthopedics, that's okay. How are you going to talk about that? What is the distance that you travel from not having the reference letters to here, that you're going to show me that there are people who think highly of you, of your skill, of your competence, of your ability to care for people, your character. All right, so it doesn't have to be ideal, but if you don't have ideal, then what's the other thing? What's the distance that what
Absolutely. It's kind of that whole idea of, stopping and reflecting and seeing how far you've come, right? Because that is ultimately, it's about, this journey as a doctor is about continuous learning and continual improvement, and you got to enjoy the ride, because otherwise what else do you do? Right? We spend so much time doing this. If you don't stop and smell the roses a little bit, really, what are we doing here, right? Next thing you know, you're gonna be 75 and still trying to be in the OR and hang with the You know what I mean? You don't want to be the person necessarily. I mean, maybe you do. I don't know. Hopefully I'll be retired by then, but yeah.
Yeah, no, and I really like that. I really like that concept of distance traveled, because it's really not what you've accomplished to this point. It speaks to what you've come before that, what you're doing and where you're going and how you're planning on achieving that, and the kind of the grit and the perseverance, the character that you've shown in order to get things done and be where you are. That's actually really important in most people's narrative, especially if it doesn't follow what we considered traditionally in the past to be ideal.
Absolutely. No, that's a wonderful point. And then on top of it all, this is something you've been talking strongly about these past two weeks, is that that whole idea of reflection. And then it shows that you've stopped and you've reflected, and then you kind of put it all together and say, this is why I'm here. Here's the evidence that supports that. Here's why I'm good at it. And most importantly, here is why I will be good for you guys, your program.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah. And I think, having that reflection, a lot of the times I think we wait for other people to recognize that. But that's a really passive and secondary way of doing that. And the more you know what your strengths are and the more you can play to your strengths, I think that's a very direct line between you and success, really.
Absolutely. But personal satisfaction, right? I mean, you have to be happy with yourself before and not trying to make somebody else happy, right? So, that's the most important thing. Yeah. Amazing. At this point, I just want to ask, we've had a couple of good questions already. Does anybody have any questions about reference letters or anything else in terms of the application process? This is a very unique opportunity to be able to ask a real life program director some direct questions about applying to residency and fellowship. That's a good one. In general, how important are reference letters in getting an interview from a program?
Right. Okay. So again, I would say that different programs are going to have different ranking strategies for getting you an interview. Some programs will interview all applicants. Some programs will only interview some. UBC as a program, we usually interview a portion of those. And we have a very diverse panel. And that's actually really important in the selection committee, is to have a very different opinions of what we think good candidates to be. So, for example, we'll often have one person who's got a strong bent towards research. We've got other people, we've got residents who are very concerned about what their peer group is going to be like moving forward as they work together. So having all these different people, and so whenever we're looking at your package, it's multiple eyes looking on it, and it's multiple eyes looking at it in different places. I would say that there's not one thing that matters most. It is really the collective. If you have one thing that's not so great, that's probably okay. If you have one thing that's terrible, that may stand out, right? And if you have one thing
absolutely.
That's terrible, hopefully this is something that you already know. Hopefully it's like, the 38% that you got in organic chemistry back in first year or something. Now you know about it, and you're gonna say something about that, or whatever it is. You took 3 years off of school. You're gonna say something about it. Reference letters are a little bit different, because one of the strengths of a reference letter is that it is blind to you. That, unfortunately, you cannot do anything about. And this is, again, it kind of in a way speaks to your own ability to vet your own insights, right?
Exactly,
your own
yes.
situational awareness to be able to choose a referee that you think is going to speak well of you.
Yep, absolutely. And, and then back to the person who asked, Anna Sanazar, your question about the PhD thing, you should be reassured in the fact that Dr. Leung just said it's a diverse panel, right? So we have bench scientists on our panel. So, if you're doing a PhD and it was a bench PhD or whatever, we have PhD candidates, we have PhD supervisors. So you should be happy and confident now that if you get those reference letters from your supervisors and they can write a good one, it will be appreciated, and it'll fall on ears that are appreciative of that. Another question is, actually, this is UBC specific, so here's a really good one from T-Dubs. If T-Dubs, are they from Toronto maybe then? Let us know if you're from Toronto. If you're unable to secure an elective at UBC as an out-of-province student, how does that impact your application?
Yeah. Well, we spoke a little bit about this last week, and again, we're talking ideals, which is hard to achieve, right? I mean, really, the interview process, it starts as soon as you want it to start, which is when you start doing an elective, if you're here for an elective, because we're vetting you just like you're vetting us. So, I mean, I can just turn that question and ask it back to you. How important is it for you to have done an elective somewhere before you rank that program? Probably you would ideally, again, like to know. Ideally, you'd like to spend a little bit of time there, and ideally, we'd like to spend a little time with you. But hey, you know what? That's not possible, and it hasn't been truly possible for the last couple of years. And you know, we're going to have to accept that. You have to accept that you may come to us never having seen us before, and you know, we're going to take you without having seen you before, and that's okay. Again, we can't go for perfect here. I don't think it's not a requisite to have done an elective here to get an interview. And once you get an interview, honestly, you have a fair shake. You have a fair go at it.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Leung, but you know, I spoke, you know, when I was speaking to the previous program director, Dr. Brookhouse, he was saying that, you know, even though orthopedics is a tight-knit community, the program director community is even more tight-knit. So, you know, you're from TWs, you're from New Brunswick. So if you get your program director in New Brunswick to write Dr. Leung a reference letter, I mean, I'm sure they know each other. And, you know, is that true?
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. In fact, you know, I would say that probably I see some of the surgeons internationally, like across the country, nationally, more often than I see some of my colleagues that work here, right? I mean, you know, especially for a time when we really weren't meeting here very much at all, I probably went to more conferences and saw, you know, the guys from Ontario and, you know, Halifax than I did my own people. So, you know, the network is small, and there is a lot of cross-pollination. If my friend back east writes me a letter and says, hey, you know, I really think that this person is, you know, top notch, I take that seriously.
Yeah. And, you know, so this is a great segue a little bit because, you know, even if you're not able to do an out-of-province elective, there are wonderful ways to get to know a program. And one of them are the virtual like program nights, right? The virtual info sessions. Dr. Leung, when is UBC?
October 30th. So that's just coming up in a couple of days. Thank you so much. It's like he puts it in a little platter and puts it out there. October 30th.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
So we're hosting a virtual CARMS open house night. And there's going to be people like Dr. Huang, who's going to be, you know, representing Scrubbed Out as well as UBC on that, as well as a bunch of residents. Our research director is going to be there. So it's really an informal venue, but it's really for you to ask questions, to get to know faces, to have a little chat. You know, virtual is you know, not quite the same as being in person and, you know, hanging out, having a coffee at 4:00 in the afternoon at the end of an OR. But, you know, this is our next best thing. We've actually had a pretty good time most nights. So please do join us on October the 30th. If you want to sign up, it's Oren Zarnett is one of our previous grads. And Oren, if you're able to join, that would be fantastic to see you.
Oren's on here. Amazing. Hi, Oren. Oh, that's fun. Yeah, so sorry, where do you go to sign up?
Yeah, so just go to the UBC website. Oh, there it is. Justin's got it, boom, pulled up right there.
Oh,
so you
thanks,
can click
Justin.
on that.
Amazing.
And if you can't find it and you're thinking about it afterwards, just go to the UBC website and it is on there.
Okay, wonderful. Mark has a question. He's another IMG. What is considered important when looking at reference letters of IMGs who may not have an opportunity to interact with individuals at UBC? So similar question, maybe a little bit different twist on it. So what's important in the reference letter?
Yeah. So again, I think that those three things that we're looking for, right, is that someone who's going to speak well of you, or someone who's going to tell us your good highlights, your good points, someone who's fairly discerning. And this again, the concept of discerning is again where maybe it would be good to think about someone who's in orthopedics to help you with that, because they will likely have seen a range of candidates in your position, give us an idea of where you're doing. You know, on the goods, you know, on that spectrum, and someone who you really have a personal connection with, someone who's going to speak to how you're doing personally. So anyone who can do those three things, even if they're from out of country, I think that's just fine, and that's your best bet.
Amazing. That's awesome. Thank you very much. I don't see any more questions. If anyone has any questions, here's your last chance to kind of ask them. Again, we've just been here chatting with Dr. Fay Leung, who's a program director of the Orthopedic Surgery Residency program at UBC, and we've been talking about how to get those really important, all-important reference letters. So we talked about who to ask, how to get them, how to write them, and how to prime your referee for them, and then basically how to follow up gently and softly, but also in a way that will let you get things done. So make sure, if you haven't already, I'm going to post this up on my live section, the Reels section. I'll also post this over at on my YouTube at the Reels Scrubbed Out. And remember, Dr. Leung, one more plug for when is our info night?
November 30th, 5 p.m. PST, which makes it a little bit later for you about back east, and Justin's put out the post there. So please click on that, sign up, and we'd love to see you there. One of the things that I want to say, if we're starting to wrap up, is the one thing that you cannot worry about once you've done those things is the reference letters. That is now out of your hands. Okay, you're writing us great letters of introduction. You've done all of your work up until this point, passing your exams, writing your grades. You've done your research if you're doing that. You've done all the extracurricular things that you like. You've put that all on your CV and your application form. And then you've asked your referees for reference letters at this point. Those are in. Now it's time to think about where you're going, what you want to do, how you want to prep for your interview, and one more time, where you want to go, because that's a really important part. We've already talked about this. Much as we're looking at you, you should be looking at us to make sure that you're making a good choice for where you want to be for the next 5 years.
Absolutely. So if you didn't catch us last week as well, we talked a lot about what program directors look for and what you should look for in a program. So again, check it all out on my account, and it's under the live reels and everything. So thank you everyone for joining us. New Brunswick, like 4 hours ahead. So it's like 10 o'clock there. So thanks for joining us. And Dr. Leung, thank you very much for joining us these past 2 weeks. If you guys have any questions, Dr. Leung, where can they find you? Amazing. Well, thank you again, everyone. Have a great night. Good luck with your applications. Good luck with your interviews. Let us know how it goes. I'm rooting for you all, and we will see you soon. Bye.
Good night.